International Visiting Fellow at the Woodstock Theological Centre in Georgetown. He has numerous publications and awards for his work on interfaith and intercultural dialogue. So I'd like to invite Father Thomas Michel to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I was very interested this morning to hear in the earlier session Dr. Aschauer's paper, in which he talks about the sickness or the malaise in modern European societies. And I found this very interesting because one of the things that I was wanting to talk about in my paper was from the Muslim scholar Sayyid Nursi, who 102 years ago, back in 1911, he gave a Friday sermon at the Friday prayers in which he tries to outline the various sicknesses or illnesses of Muslim societies, and he tries to offer the, what would you say, a prescription for how they can work towards societal health, how they can become better. And I think in a conference like this, what we're talking about is peace and harmony in our modern societies. I think that the prescriptions are the analysis of Sayyid Nursi. I think are very much worth our while to consider. So when he's looking around at the various illnesses of Muslim societies, the fundamental illness that he sees that kind of pervades everything is what he calls despair. Despair. And I think it's something that we all recognize. It's you hear people saying, you know, nothing ever changes. What can we do? We can't really, anytime a group of people want to make any change in society, the powers that be, they step on it. Things remain the same 20 years from now. It's going to be just the same as it is now. I think we've all heard such things, and maybe ourselves have felt them. Well, in the Damascus sermon, Sayyid Nursi, who wrote this, as I told you, in 1911, but then about 40 years later, he looked at the changes in the world and he rewrote the sermon. He says that there is something we can do in the prescription for this despair or this defeatist attitude that we have is hope. Now, I think part of the things that cause our feelings of despair or hopelessness is just the very complexity of life, the complexity of economic situations, the complexity of geopolitical crises that can't be easily solved, bioethical advances. All of these things raise the level of difficulty where we think we have to rely on experts, and the experts themselves often don't agree. So we think, well, how can we really accomplish anything? But this is not the kind of despair that Sayyid Nursi is referring to. He's writing not as a political scientist or as a sociologist, but as a Muslim believer. He's writing as a man of faith. He wants his fellow believers to realize that a great portion of the sad economic and political and social state their regions were experiencing was their own fault. To blame all the problems on others, he said, is missing the point. They had to be the first ones to change. And only if they and their comrades were to become a new kind of person would society itself eventually be transformed. But in order to do this, they have to trust that God will give them the strength and the vision to change themselves. They have to have the hope that God is on their side and will enable them to undergo this spiritual transformation. So, Nursi's basic insight is that the sickness of societies is not due to political, military, and economic realities, which are outside the power of our ordinary believers to control, but rather they're due to the fact that believers themselves have lost hope that God will grant them success if they persevere with faith and trust. So he says, what kind of hope is needed? If people simply place their hopes in a regime change or in a new 5-year economic plan, but they remain themselves the same old, lazy, untruthful, selfish selves, societal transformation will be at best superficial and ephemeral. The next generation will merely have a new set of problems of the same type as those faced by earlier generations. And this insight brings Nursi to what is, in my opinion, the heart of the Damascus sermon. The real hope that can transform society is the hope that life of this world is not the only life that we will experience. For Nursi, nothing leads to greater malaise, greater world weariness, and self-complacent despair than the idea that this life is all there is. Nursi raises the rhetorical hypothesis. Here I'll quote him. He says, you'll rule the world and live for 1,000,000 years, but in the end you will be dispatched to non-existence with no possibility of return to life. Confronted with such a disagreeable fate, Nursi holds, and I quote him again, the imagination of one who has not lost his true humanity and who has been awakened, rather than being joyful and pleased, such a person would weep with longing, with sighs and regrets at there being no eternal happiness. So here's the core, really, of his analysis then. A society that has no religion, no hope for life to come, no belief, no trust in God, is condemned to live with its sicknesses and hand them on to the next generation. A person in a modern godless society is like a person condemned to death and realizes he's incapable of saving himself. As Nursi puts it, in the face of the sentence of death, before anything else, man is searching for a truth contained only in true religion that he may save himself. The present state of the world testifies to that. I think this is very interesting, and it's a point I think that we all have to really consider, that when we're talking about what is the path to peace and harmony, and this is a point of our symposium, we have to, I think, Nursi raises for all of us, he's a Muslim, I'm not, I'm a Christian, but he raises the question for all of us, whether if our sociological, our political analysis of societies and the crises they face and the sicknesses they experience do not consider the possibility or the hope of change that comes from a conviction that this life is not all there is, are we kind of condemning ourselves to a frustration of not really coming to any possibility of real change? Are we condemning ourselves to just handing on the problems to the next generation? And I think that that he's raising a very good point that we have to consider. By eliminating the whole question of religion, whatever one's religion might be, and God, and whatever one's understanding of God might be, if by eliminating that from our analysis, are we really eliminating also the real possibility of change and of a real hope for change? So that's his first point. He turns to another sickness, and this is what he calls the death of truthfulness in social and political life. He's very harsh in his evaluation of lying and falsehood. He writes, "Truthfulness and honesty are the vital principles of life and of the life of Islamic society. Hypocrisy," he says, "is simply a sort of actualized lying. Flattery and artifice are cowardly lying. Duplicity and double-dealing are harmful lying. As for lying, it's to slander the all-glorious, powerful Maker." So, although Nursi is writing about Islamic society, non-Muslim societies as well, I believe, would do well to heed his warnings. Falsehood in the public sphere is an influence that's prevalent in Muslim societies, but perhaps even more so, who knows, in non-Muslim societies. Political and social discourse today that's marked by terms like expediency and collateral damage, surgical strikes, ethnic cleansing, manipulated accounts, damage control, and spin management. These are all themselves terms of falsity, created purposely in order to disguise and hide the truth rather than affirm and expound it. Nursi points out that there are many forms that untruthfulness takes. His hypocrisy is professing one thing but doing something else. Flattery is praising someone to their face in order to ingratiate or manipulate them, all the while speaking or working against them in their absence. Duplicity is pretending to hold one view when one's real opinion is the opposite. A person today does not have to follow the national and international news very closely to discover that these various forms of untruthfulness are rampant in all modern societies. Such forms of untruth are even recommended in training courses as successful diplomatic or marketing strategies to be followed. By contrast, Nursi holds that a society can only progress through a reliance on the truth. Although he claims that there can be no compromise with the truth, he's not suggesting a kind of full disclosure for which sensationalist tabloid newspapers are noted. He advises everything you say must be true, but it is not right to say everything that is true. If on occasion it is damaging, then be silent. But he says there's no fatwa for lying. Everything you say must be the truth, but you don't have the right to say everything that is true, because if it's not sincere, it'll have a detrimental effect, and truth will be spent on wrong. So this was a quotation from Nursi. Now he takes up a third sickness of modern societies. He says love of enmity is a sickness that infects many societies. It's true, isn't it? Muslim or not Muslim or no religion, but it's difficult to understand. 5 minutes? Okay. It's difficult to understand the human psychology that leads people to dislike and suspect and fear their neighbors who are different from them in terms of race or language or religion or nationality. And yet that seems to be a universal phenomenon in human history. This tendency, which runs contrary to the teachings of religion, nevertheless gives rise to hatred, violence, and war, causing untold human suffering and material damage. Nursi asserts that even if past history has indeed been marked by enmity and violent encounters, he says that the time for enmity and hostility is finished. 2 world wars have shown how evil and destructive and what an awesome wrong is enmity. It's become clear there's no benefit in it, in which case, on condition that they are not aggressive, do not let the evils of one's enemy become the basis of your enmity. So he's saying, don't try to punish those who are doing wrong. God will punish them. Leave it to them. It's not our job to do that sort of thing. What he's trying to do is to break the chain of righteous injury and retribution, which has characterized so much of history, whereby one group avenges themselves on those who have wronged them, and in the process bring about a new cycle of injury and reprisal. This unhappy model that has formed the historical pattern of relationships between many national, ethnic, and religious groups. Each group claims that it has been wronged by the other and is simply giving others what they deserve. Nursi is suggesting that believers let God give their enemies what they deserve, rather than that they arrogate to themselves that responsibility. Well, my paper is really long, like all of our papers, so I can't go into everything. He takes up six different illnesses of modern societies, and he analyzes, what has to be done in the face of these. And I hope that you will have an opportunity to read the Damascus sermon. It was written 100 years ago, but still has a lot to say to people today. And he's talking, of course, as a Muslim in Muslim worship service of Friday prayers. He's giving a sermon. But what he has to say, I think, has a lot of relevance also for those of us who are not Muslims. When we look at our societies, when we look at international secular societies and the way they relate to each other today, I think there's much relevance in Nursi's analysis. Thank you for your time.